Hello and welcome back! Thank you all so much for the response to the previous Onimusha retrospective, and I hope you all are enjoying the Let's Plays that Will and I are putting out. This one's just going to be a long video, so let's dive right in. Motohide Eshiro directed this adventure. He's a producer whose works have included some of the Phoenix Wright series. Onimusha 2 has been his only directorial credit, or so I can find. Onimusha 2 was developed alongside Warlords and was released in Japan in May 2002. It was made by a different team from the one that made the first game. They implemented a bigger focus on adventure rather than action in order to make it feel distinct from its predecessor. Like the original Onimusha, this game was also planned to be released for the PlayStation 1, but the release of the PS2 made the team change the release to the new console. Keiji Inafune saw this game as a way to include many things he wanted in the first game, but in the end could not, given the time restraints. Onimusha 2 was a commercial success in Japan. Capcom announced they shipped over 1 million copies within the first few months after release, having faster sales than the predecessor. During that year, it was also the third best-selling game in the country. As of May 2008, it had sold over 1.9 million copies worldwide. However, the staff noted it had poor sales in Europe. As a result, they tried appealing to the European fans by adding more Western tones to their next work. Coming soon. The story of the game is a classic samurai trope: revenge. 10 years after the ending of Warlords, a now demonically charged Nobunaga is wreaking havoc upon the country. He attacks the Yagyu village and upsets our protagonist in the process. Returning home to an unexpected welcoming committee, our new boy Jubei Yagyu wants to give that pesky overlord a good seeing to. Along the way, we'll meet a colourful cast of friends and enemies, discover the mysterious, not really, origins of the Yagyu clan, and build up to a final confrontation with a big bad. This time around we have 5 playable characters. The team really wanted to spice things up and succeeded in creating some very different feeling movesets. First up is Yagyu Jubei, our grumpy protagonist. We'll play as this chap for the majority of the story. Most of his characterization is shown in the beginning hour. He's gruff, clueless, but very direct in his intentions. I feel he was kept as more of a blank slate because of how many characters you can interact with on each playthrough. He's based on the real-life swordsman and small-time warlord Yagyu Muneyoshi, founder of the Yagyu Shinkage Ryu style of swordsmanship. His appearance was modelled after the late Japanese actor Yusaku Matsuda. Matsuda is also the reference for Aokiji in One Piece. Oyu next. She's the main female character in the game and is an integral part of the plot, seeing as the critical route always circles around to her interactions with Jubei. Her design is cool, although I think it's a really typical male writer thing that she's just given the love interest role and has very little agency other than to be super into Jubei. It's a shame because there's tons of interesting stuff to explore about her character. Like, who trained her as a warrior? How did she escape her previous life to go on her quest? I could go for a big chunk of her character development as a person, rather than just being a token sexy lady. Shame. Kotaro, you have the floor. This guy's a tricky little ninja who follows Jubei around for the majority of the quest. He's endearing at times, while also being quite naive and brash in his actions. He has a fixation on proving that Oyu is up to no good, and always tries to warn you about his suspicions. Magoichi's my favourite. A rough, no-nonsense scientist who loves guns, booze, and being a stoic chunk of man. Beneath that steely exterior, he's actually quite sweet, although it does take some time for him to show it. Men. Eke is the last of the core cast of heroes. This rabble-rousing rascal is a monk who follows the way of the spear. He provides a lot of comic relief when compared to the other side characters, although he does hide a tragic past which he covers up with his exuberant outward attitude. Most of his character development is done quite early in the story, so you have plenty of time to just be buddies throughout the adventure. Hey guys, it's an Onimusha game! You know what that means? The talented maniacs of the robot CGI team pulled out all the stops to create some of the most incredible FMVs of the generation, and it was only year 2. Though very sporadically used, they're nonetheless remarkable for the time. Unfortunately, this is the last game to use the pre-rendered background style, and hoo boy did they deliver! Even from the opening scenes, it's clear that the art team was working way above the standard of the original game. There's an interesting layer of FMV loots over the otherwise static background, which really brings each environment to life. The colour palettes are greatly expanded too, featuring much more diversity in plant and machine-based areas. There's always something moving which makes it feel alive. Like the first game, the gooey and fleshy demon areas feel grotesque and alien, steadily invading the background as you progress through the story. It's worth mentioning that the lead character designer for this game is none other than Keita Amamiya. He's been known for little projects like Kamen Rider and Garo, and his influence is abundantly clear on the more prolific demons and moments in the game. This would explain why I love Gogen Dantes so very much. The music was composed by Hideki Okugawa. He's best known for being the main composer of all 3 incarnations of Street Fighter III, especially Third Strike. Honestly, I think he did an incredible job. The wonderful recurring theme of the game is sprinkled throughout, as well as distinct tracks for each area. Every character has their own theme and motif, and it really reflects their personality quite well. Before we continue, I would recommend you watch my first essay on the original game, as many of the features I'll be discussing have evolved from it directly. Oof, we got a big list of changes and improvements to go through, so let's start with combat. You can now upgrade your armour. Instead of finding new sets, you slowly juice up your chest, arms and legs throughout the game. Not really sure what it does in terms of damage resistance, but the final look is pretty tasty. You have 2 of the same weapon types that Samanosuke wielded in the first game, Lightning Boy and Speedy Wind Boy. They're almost exact replicas, but utilise Jubei's faster moveset. The real interesting stuff is the 2 wildcards, Pokey Ice Boy and the Big Old Slammin' Hammer Boy. These 2 really switch up your ability to engage with a plethora of enemy types. I'm going to be honest, and I'm going to say I think combat feels amazing in this game. Every aspect of the original Swordplay has been enhanced in some way. The hit stop is so satisfying and each swing feels like it has purpose and weight behind it. There are 3 new fundamental additions to adjust how you play. First off are charge attacks. The PS2 had a pressure-sensitive gamepad, and holding R1 tightly allowed you to channel your badass energy into a unique attack, of which there were 3 levels. When you first unlock a weapon, level 1 was available. The rest were found by engaging in the gift system, detailed later in this video. This effectively doubles your arsenal of attacks, and allows you to sweep, launch, and stagger even the most stalwart of beasties. Next, we have the secret technique. This is an input-sensitive command, up, down, and then square. When performed correctly, your character will do a unique move, usually emphasised on knockbacks and giving you some breathing room. The sub-characters have these moves locked in, but Jubei will have to solve a puzzle box to unlock the secret for each of his weapons. The final addition is the Onimusha mode. During combat, enemies can release a large juicy soul that takes considerably longer to absorb. Get 5 of these bad boys and you can go into Oni mode! You get a sweet new hairdo, purple energy out the wazoo, temporary invincibility, and a homing magic attack. It's a classic action game Rage of the Gods kind of system, but it's very welcome against all the enemies as it doesn't feel too overpowered. Remember criticals? The Isen system has been tightened up considerably as well, as timing windows have been extended slightly. That isn't to say it's easy though. You can only critical strike certain attacks from the bigger baddies and your timing must still be perfect. The charge system also interacts with the critical system. If you hold a level 3 charge and perform a counter, time will slow down and you'll obliterate every enemy on the screen. It's fucking rad. It's just as well because enemies seem to be significantly more aggressive. Gone are the methodical strikes of Samanosuke's foes, these boys are out for blood. Every encounter from about the midway points feels intense and knife edge. Lose your cool and they'll take their chance. While some of this feels cheap and stun-locky, I think the devs really wanted to push the combat to feel intense. For instance, you can get stun-locked into a wall bounce. These creatures are clearly designed to pressure you into a corner. Maybe it's just my inner masochist, but I love being challenged in this way. To counter this new oppression, the 4 unique weapons often work as hard counters to the more problematic enemies. Elevated Archer Lizard? Tornado. Demon Razorbug problem? Hammer Time. Kung Fu Ogres? Pokey Pokey. It's a great mix-up and it encourages you to experiment with each weapon to find your flow. At particular times in the story, your friends will join your battles as strikers. This is especially useful in the boss encounters. Throughout the game, you also get to control your rascally compatriots at certain instances. This is dependent on their affection for you in the forthcoming gift system. Ooh, shiny presents. Wow, we really like that one. Without going into too much depth, just know that each character feels very unique to control when dealing with the savage hordes of cheeky beasties. They all have access to charge attacks, secret combos, and also different Isen timings. You also unlock different weapons and armour for them during the adventure. Dress up! Hooray! Oof, that's combat out of the way. Now let's look at some of the other parts of the game. The major difference of this title, compared to the first installment, is the RPGification of the franchise. The first third of the game sees you returning to a hub of sorts where you can interact with NPCs, do one or two mini quests, spend gold, and buy shiny presents for your potential best buddy. That's right, it's a dating game! Each of your prospective partners will react to a different gift given based on their personality. These reactions can be ranked from A to G, and this feeds into a hidden affection rating which will dictate your interactions throughout the rest of the story. This kind of deep system is quite amazing to me, if not a little overwhelming at first. It's best played with a guide to min-max your way to your ideal lover, I mean best buddy. But wait, there's more! The characters' stories are entangled with one another in different pairs. You have Magoichi and Eke, Oyu and Kotaro. Within that, your primary buddy will interact with you more and reveal more of their story. Although this is purely replay value, the amount of content is fucking staggering. That means you have at least 4 playthroughs with different cutscenes. While it doesn't really affect the main narrative, the fact that the writing team did this much work and cram it into a 12-hour campaign is staggering even today. Once you finish the game, you unlock a handy chart which shows the routes you potentially missed. I'm sure this awakened many visual novel fiends in their formative years. If I were to be critical, the characters are pretty tropey. There's no real upsets to tradition, but I like the idea that you can form your own mini-canon within the game. With all these different parts established, after a certain point of the story, the RPG mechanics are pretty much thrown out and then it's business as usual, and it wouldn't be an Onimusha game without my nemesis. Puzzle boxes! That's right, they're back, and this time they're slidey. Cannot tell you how much my brain does not handle this. You have to form a picture within a certain number of moves in order to get the reward inside. This is a very Marmite aspect to the game, and despite my lack of ability, I do respect the inclusion of the minigames. I would say there are more puzzles throughout the game compared to the first, and with a bit more variety. There's a find the keys, lateral thinking picture games, and even a good test of your manual dexterity. This was clearly conceived by those rascal Resident Evil veterans. The mandatory puzzles are not overly challenging, but their inclusion is a nice pace breaker. The Dark Realm is back too! This challenge dungeon is vastly improved over the original. It's faster, more unforgiving, and intensely rewarding. If you unlock Kotaro's scenario, he has 2 small dungeons to proceed through. There's an optional one around the 60% mark for Jubei, and a big delicious grindy 20-30 floor time buster at the end. It's fantastic that they jammed the generous enemy roster into unpredictable formations to fuck up your shit. Not much to report other than you're really pushed to perform efficiently and not waste your healing items. Enemy-wise, Onimusha 2 has variety in spades. On top of some returning favourites, you now have much more diversity in shape, speed and size. Your common fodder are these lanky lizard boys that mob you any chance they get, as well as the classic ninja archetype. A special mention though goes to the mid-sized guys with skeleton sentinels and staff-wielding ogres. Each of their attacks has so much impact and knock you back so far if you're not careful. The boss pantheon is not really large, but it is particularly memorable thanks to the recurring antagonists. Your first rival character is this big chap called Gingham Fats. He's your typical big lug, swinging around a variety of sharp implements as he scuttles after you on insectoid legs. Seeing his evolution in response to yours is quite a treat, and by the final time you fight him, the big bastard even grows wings. Then we have this guy. What a boss!
Sephiroth?
Listen.
Thank you for staying. Who are you? Oh, I'm glad you asked. My name is Gogan Dantis, the greatest swordsman of all demons.
Gogan fucking Dantis. I really want to emphasise just how much I adore this guy. His theatrics, demeanour, and just general idea of chivalry is pure nonsense, and he's so thrilling because of it. He appears no less than 3 times in the story, and the first 2 times he soundly thrashes Jubei, proclaiming to be the greatest swordsman of all demons, and goads our grumpy hero about his ability, or lack thereof. The funny thing is, Dantis has a shield. You can't really damage him the first 2 times you fight him. He's arrogant and ignorant, and will do anything to win. It's also a great way of showing Jubei's growth as a warrior, as each time you're able to damage him just a little bit more beyond his shield. You obtain a MacGuffin in the latter parts of the game to disable the shield and have a fair fight, but you can also just choose to fight him on his terms and still win. By the end, he acknowledges Jubei as the superior fighter and passes away with a smile. God, I love that smug bastard. To me, he easily eclipses Nobunaga as a villain through his swagger alone. Speaking of Nobunaga, you do get to fight him twice! It's quite a good final boss, especially compared to the first game. He utilises the weapon elements that you've harnessed and keeps on some amazing pressure. He does have a second form which, although novel in design, is not nearly as fun to fight because it's just a run and gun minigame which takes far too long. Still better than the first game. So that's it for all the system change gubbins. I suppose it's time to talk about just why I adore this game so much. As I mentioned before, combat is easily the best in the series. It's fast, intense and immensely satisfying. Every battle feels hard-won and stylish, and really encapsulates how samurai the game feels. Fighting the enemies in the pouring rain in the opening scenes of the story is so cinematic. The pre-rendered backgrounds are just gorgeous. Every single scene of this game is burned into my mind. This is of course because of all the playthroughs I've done, but also each area feels so unique. I'm a sucker for good foliage in games, and the forest area has it in buckets. Oh yeah, did I mention that this game reuses about 80% of the environment from the first game? Holy shit. This made my brain explode the first time, and each revisit to a rebuilt Gifu castle gives me the shivers. This was the first time I'd experienced decent asset reuse, and as well as being efficient development-wise, it hammers home the familiarity you have with the original area. Regarding the characters, they really lend a lot of spirit to the game. This story feels so much more populated than the first game, and rightly so. Even though the localization and voice acting is unintentionally hilarious and dated, there is just so much life in this game. The bustling little mining town of the early story is always a welcome reprieve from the drab horrors of the nearby mine. Even as you continue your journey, your returning comrades help you feel less alone. It's a nice touch. The unique side story system is also a huge plus. This lends to the immense replayability of the game, as well as your own personal connection to the characters. This is purely my own opinion, but the amount you invest in winning over your potential BFF gives a lot more weight to their presence in the narrative. I mean, think about it. You've essentially done the first round of equipment in an RPG for your teammates, and they return the favour by saving your ass. Every time you play as a side character, they're saving Jubei. It's a nice counterpoint to how headstrong and isolated Jubei makes himself out to be. It's particularly poignant because some of your friends can and will die as a result of them pursuing their goals. In a nutshell, I don't think the writing is award-winning, far from it, but I think that after spending about 60 hours on multiple playthroughs, you can't help but be endeared to these people in some way. However, it's not all sunshine and rainbows when I think about this game. I'd like to explore some things that maybe aren't so good. I'm going to avoid discussing technical limitations because this is a title from 2 console generations ago. Number 1 with a bullet is the characterization of Oyu. As with many stories of this era, continuing to this very day even, Oyu is only really depicted as a sex object and not as a living, breathing person. I mean, her introduction to the player is her taking a shower. Really classy. I know it was a different time, writers were, and still are, super horny and wanting to appeal to a male audience, but it's a pretty thin excuse. Capcom has created some brilliant female characters previously. Look at Jill Valentine, Claire Redfield, or Regina from Dino Crisis. Oyu has very little agency in the game, other than her relevance to the plot. She's the baddie's sister, and to be a fawning love interest to a person she barely knows. I can't imagine any woman who plays this title would feel good about the representation in it. It's a product of its time, sure, but this was something that really stuck out to me upon reflection. The localization really doesn't reflect well on the game either. Some elements of the story are genuinely confusing because of it, especially around the first big reveal. Awkward plot threads and motivations are just jammed in and awkwardly scripted. The voice actors did their best with what they were given, so I can't blame them for that. I suppose it's just a good foundation for what good localization can be today. These negative points aside, I'm still happy to say that this is one of my favourite games. Despite its flaws, it's a fantastic dive into a turbulent part of Japanese history and really tries to explore some very fun characters. Without reading into it too much, I feel this is a story about relationships. Watching Jubei start off guarded and alone, meeting people with similar trauma and making bonds with them along their journey is quite sweet, even if the genesis of their friendships are presents. The same can be said for how you interact with Gingham Fats and Gogan Dantas along the way, whether it's a comrade, a parent, a rival, a lover or a mortal enemy. These connections help Jubei and the gang become stronger as people and give them the ability to pursue their goals. If you were to take any message away from the game, I think it would be how valuable our bonds are with the people around us. Is Onimusha 2 the first STRAND game? Probably not. Thanks for sticking with me on my rambling over a 20-year-old game. I really appreciate all the feedback, and I hope you'll join me again for the finale of the series.